We acknowledge, celebrate, and pay our respects to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of the Canberra region and to all First People on whose traditional lands we meet and work. Their cultures are among the oldest continuing cultures in human history. We also acknowledge and celebrate that many of the speakers in this series were based on other traditional lands and territories across Australia and the world. We recognise their past and present leaders and acknowledge their contribution to our collective past and futures. Welcome to Cybernetics Snacks, a speaker series featuring leading voices in the cybernetics conversation. We're currently exploring the past, present and future of cybernetics. Human-computer interaction with an American Society for Cybernetics drizzle. Today, we're in conversation with Paul Pangaro. We've asked Paul 4 questions. Let's get started.
Imagine an undergrad who in earlier childhood had always been interested in computers, read every book in the library, kind of thing. Certainly in an era when you didn't have personal machines. Got to college, studied computer science and humanities and theater and AI, and went to all of the typical lectures that you might expect from the greats in that particular school, which happened to be Minsky and Papert. Names you likely know. And there was something fascinating about them, and yet something unsatisfying about what they were talking about as being artificial intelligence. And I didn't quite know what it was, but it was something a little bit unsatisfying. Maybe it was because I had been very interested in humanities and had a brother who influenced me tremendously in theater and music and so on and so forth. There was something that didn't quite fit. And then one day, when I had graduated and I was then working in a research lab, this guy named Gordon Pask walked in, and he was talking cybernetics. And I had heard the word often at this place, MIT by chance. And I had heard it especially from a guy named Jerry Lettvin, who had been a biologist. And of course, biology wasn't my thing. So I was thinking, okay, I don't really get this connection between biology and cybernetics. But Pask had a way of talking about intelligence and learning and conversation in a way that felt to me fundamentally human. And I wanted computers to do those things, but this dissatisfaction with AI was now satisfied with Pask, partly because of the humanity of it and also because of the specificity of it. He had a real serious, rigorous theory of conversation, so-called conversation theory, which is all about interaction and so on and so forth. So I left the PhD where I was and I started following Pask around and eventually did a PhD with him. But the main thing was to be with him, to be near him. And that was the beginning, really, of a trajectory that I've simply continued ever since then. That's a kind of origin story. And through Pask and coming into the American Society for Cybernetics, and I see we have another past president here today, Bill Reckmeyer. I met many others. I met face-to-face in the way I'd met Pask, Heinz von Forster, Stafford Beer, Umberto Maturana, Francisco Varela, Mary Catherine Bateson in the course of time. And they were living and breathing this thing called cybernetics. And I was fascinated and converted, really, if you will, from this computer science-y, let's start from the zeros and ones and let's see how close to being human we could get. And instead, starting from what is this thing called purpose and how do systems have purpose and what do they need to have purpose and what's kind of the minimum requirement of that. And that felt to me much more fruitful because as you got closer and closer to the zeros and ones, you lost less of what it meant to be human. So this is my origin story.
Yeah, amazing. So it sounds like you encountered on your journey a lot of different people, probably a lot of different ideas. So across that time and even now, is there a favorite approach or theory or text or person who was particularly influential to you or that remains your favorite?
It's a hard question. All of the questions are hard in the best sense, and I appreciate them all. And I've been pondering this. Well, certainly the ideas of everyone I mentioned feel to me essential, irreplaceable. So again, from Forster, Pask. I didn't mention Ashby. I never met him, but Varela, Maturana, Beer. Their work is seminal and critical and necessary, I think, to understand what this word cybernetics really means. But if you force me to do one thing, I accept. What was the rise of cybernetics? People often say, well, Wiener wrote this book. Fine, yes, no question. But I feel that that's not the sufficient way to tell the story, that you really have to talk about the 1940s and 1950s, when there became an interest in thinking about systems and thinking about those systems from the perspective, from the frame of purpose. Now, it's also true that it's after World War II, and there was a lot of mess there, nuclear bomb, and there was a lot of concern about science doing those kinds of things rather than, well, what's the alternative in the modern world, et cetera. Whole history there that I won't touch on, and I don't know as well as other scholars would. But what did occur is this focus on how does a system achieve its goal? What is its purpose? Does the system itself have a purpose? And if there's a purpose inside it, how does it act and sense? And what goes on inside such that it does what it wants, gets what it wants in the definition of one definer of cybernetics. So this was a hot topic. And one of the ways in which the topic got hotter was, and this is my answer to your question, what one thing, what one story? And Genevieve knows these very well, and she often quotes them. There was a series of meetings funded by the Josiah Macy Foundation, Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation, to be complete. And they were a small collection of scholars collected by Warren McCullough, who had been very influential across many fields in this time frame. Also was a teacher of Jerry Lettvin, whom I mentioned earlier, so the lineage was there. And Maturana was also involved with Lettvin and McCullough. Anyway, they intermingle very carefully, very beautifully, I should say. So in the 1940s, the series of meetings began, which were called the Macy Meetings, and they were talking cybernetics. And it was a collection by McCullough of a few dozen people, 10 times over the course of not quite as many years. And the focus was, here's somebody in neurophysiology, brain stuff specifically, talking how that worked. And then another person would talk about the generality of that as a cybernetic system. And then you might have a cell biologist come and talk about cell biology, and then another expert talking about that as the generality. That was roughly the format of those. And these meetings over the course of almost 10 years, 45 to 53, changed the world, I think. Changed the world because they were transdisciplinary. They crossed over all of the different disciplines. And they looked at systems from the point of view of their purpose, not what they were made of. And this changed the focus from, oh, you're interested in cell biology, you're interested in linguistics, you're interested in mathematics, whatever, instead of, oh, what kind of information is involved there? What kind of information is involved here, etc. And this brought the word feedback into the vocabulary. If you go to the Google Ngram graphic system, fantastic thing, and you type in feedback, and by the way, you should type in feed hyphen back, because that's how it started. And you see the 1940s cybernetics. So for me, these Macy meetings were extremely important. And I think they changed the world. They gave a new language to talk about systems in terms of their purpose and in terms of information flows rather than in terms of what they were made out of. And these ideas suffused the disciplines, didn't always bounce back and reflect positively on cybernetics and give cybernetics the place it needed. Story from another time. But nonetheless, I think it was quite important that cybernetics existed at the time. One other point, it was transdisciplinary, which means it created a new language. Today, everyone talks, we're interdisciplinary. Great. But are you creating a new language, or are you a bunch of different disciplines talking in your own language about the same thing? That's better than completely siloed and not talking at all, but it's not the same as a new language, a new frame, a new way of thinking. And this was the contribution of cybernetics of that time. So for me, that's my answer.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I think what I'm hearing you say is cybernetics, it's quite deeply theoretical, but it was also creating these new languages and these new ways of thinking about things. And I think also can have quite a practical application. And looking at the kind of work you do, I get the impression that you definitely want to see cybernetics applied and used in perhaps more practical ways than just purely theoretical. So I was wondering if you could tell us about an example of where you yourself have applied cybernetics or have seen cybernetics applied to create or shape or improve something in the world around us.
Sure. I'm going to cheat a little. It's a conversation. I can do what I want, right? It's
You
not
can.
coercion here. But I want to say, though, for a moment, I don't see cybernetics as theoretical. I see it partly sometimes by great theoreticians, Gordon Pask, Ross Ashby, Heinz von Forster, maybe others, as theoretical. But Pask also had a great history in building machines and in trying out different kinds of interactivity between humans and machines between machines and machines that were not theory first. They were experiment first, theory after. You could look at Pask's career as this intertwining of those two things. That's, again, a little off to the side. Stafford Beer did experiments with pond, what's the right phrase? With animals that float around in ponds to see whether you could get animal cultures to compute things, for example. So, et cetera. I don't want to go off on the tangent. So for me, and for others, another quick aside, Andy Pickering's written this amazing book called The Cybernetic Brain, which is about the British branch, if I don't like to call it a branch, but the British activity in cybernetics for a long period of time, mostly about 4 people, but also with some others doing it. And he says it's not at all about theory, it's about action. And that cybernetics is, instead of knowing ahead of time, like a scientist, and waiting until I know something, and then maybe making something like an engineer and doing something with it. Cybernetics is about acting to know enough to act better. And in today's complex world, that's what we need, right? Because we can't predict what's going to happen when we do this in hopes of changing climate, when we do that in hopes of changing the dialogue between polarized points of view and so on. Any wicked challenge is not something that you can predict the outcome of in advance. So it's not like science, it's it's performative. Pickering calls it performative ontology, but I go too far. You've asked a valid question. Let me try to come back. So the cheating of this answer is I could talk a lot, and would love to, about my specific prior work, which is to apply conversation theory to interactivity in various forms. So for example, if I go to a website now and I get a recommendation, this is not a conversation. The recommendation engine is talking to me about who I was and giving me a suggestion. Now I can accept that suggestion or I can reject that suggestion. That's not a conversation. And in fact, most of the time, humans and machines accept the suggestion because it's easy and because, oh, wow, you're giving me something, that's great. But that recommendation can often be something that takes advantage of my human nature and yokes me to be engaged and to stay engaged. Facebook algorithms and so on and so forth, right? And this is bad for 2 reasons. First of all, it takes my time and gives it to someone else. And I am in service of what they want rather than what I want, probably, or more. I'm more guided by their choices than by my choices. And also, equally challenging is I am subject to an algorithm that causes me to stay there longer. That's how the machine learning algorithm works. And that staying there longer works because it brings me down the rabbit hole. It shocks me, it makes me outraged, it makes me afraid. And these are the things that cause me to be more engaged. And we have what we have today in the world that I don't have to explain to this group. So I want to replace that with conversation of a real kind, such that, for example, if Google says, hi, this is what I suggest is the first result, or Spotify says you can listen to this music, or worse, YouTube says, watch this video. I want to be able to say, why'd you show that to me? Where'd that come from? Does it take into account this interest of mine in sustainability or whatever, right? Is it about me or is it about you? And who are you? You're the algorithm. Where'd you come from? You came from the folks who want to engage me 100% of the time, such that they make money. This is not a conversation. I've written about how this is not ethical. I'm not an expert in ethics, but I think I can claim that an ethical interface is an interface that allows a free flow of transparency and truthful interaction, such that if I say, why did you show that to me? I get a real answer. So these are the kinds of applications in a partial answer to your question of what I'm trying to do, how I would try to apply it. There are many other applications and many other case studies, but this would be my thing. But I'm going to cheat and say, wait a minute. I also want to say that I am working on and trying to engage other people in working on Macy meetings for the 21st century. So what does that mean? Well, what was the context of the 20th century, which caused the original Macy meetings to be interesting? I described that a little bit. They were transdisciplinary, for example. But they were elite because they were selected by Warren McCullough, 20, 30 people of his sort. So brilliant scholars of a certain American and European background, and limited in ways that were part of his design. Well, this is the 21st century. So we need to be trans-global and inclusive, table stakes, right? But also, my third is transgenerational, because these wicked problems that we have in the world, I'm not going to see a lot of them, right? Many people in this meeting will see many more of them, and your children will see yet more unless we do something. So I've invoked the Macy meeting naming and said #NewMacy. And you can look that up online if you wish, or maybe there's some links I've sent, and I'm happy to send more, to say we need a 21st century version of saying what the hell is going on. So it's not post-World War II, but it's post-COVID pandemic, not, because it's not post. It's after climate issues, population issues, food insecurity issues, social, racial inequity issues. How much time do you have to list the pandemics of today and across all of these fields? So is there a new Macy initiative? Movement is a little bit audacious, but I think we need to be audacious. If we're not audacious, we're not going to get anywhere. To invoke whatever it is that systems and cybernetics has to offer, and to offer it in a way that is conversational and ethical, and maybe will help bring about a dialogue among those who can affect change, those who don't understand what that change might be. None of us quite do, but some of us might. And then what is the conversation and with whom toward action? So another phrase would be conversations for action, not just conversation. So this is the thing I'm trying to work on with cybernetic principles. I have a co-lead, Kate Doyle. It's a musician, musicologist interested in improvisation, but also very centered on this idea that we have work to do. And that work has to be experimental, has to be open-ended, and it has to be transdisciplinary, transglobal, and transgenerational. So I would like to emphasize that one answer to your question about what I'm trying to do in the present. Because if we don't do something, it's going to go worse than it has. And I strongly believe my commitment to cybernetics has been lifelong. You heard that from an undergraduate time. And without any better ideas and without any stronger way to tell the story, to talk about all of these individuals who've done extraordinary work. But what are the concepts? What are the frameworks? What are the models? What are the rigorous ideas? What's the help that cybernetics can bring? So, new Macy would be my answer.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. And I think many people here in the school would love if we could continue the conversation with you about that new Macy's project. It sounds absolutely brilliant. So I think, yeah, thank you. So I think that ties really well into our final question, and maybe it's something you can just expand on a little more, is about cybernetics going into the future. Cybernetics has been around, obviously, a really long time, and the final question that we ask our speakers is, what's one thing that you would add or remove or do differently in shaping a cybernetics for the 21st century?
So again, I'm going to cheat.
Go for it.
I can't give you one thing.
Yep.
But I can give you a coherent set of things, which for me are coherent, and I would like to make the case that they are in themselves. And that's in the nature of the way one might bring cybernetics out. So, what happened? Went really well in the 40s and 50s, maybe in the 60s. AI came along, sort of took off because computers could do all of these amazing things. And wait a minute, cybernetics, what happened to that? Where are the machines that cybernetics could demonstrate what would happen? What could be done? Now, ironically, neural nets started in cybernetics. Most people don't know that. There were cyberneticians who looked at the brain and said, oh, brain has neurons, that's cool. And these neurons are doing things, and maybe we could think about how powerfully those neurons could compute something. And they looked around and they saw, oh, Alan Turing, had thought about how powerful a Turing machine could be made to be. And McCulloch and Pitts, McCulloch I mentioned, Pitts is a mathematician. They came along and they said, oh, well, I can prove mathematically, they proved mathematically, that you could take a neural net and do anything that a Turing machine could do. Wow, this was amazing. But then what happened was people said, okay, neural net, Turing machine, and then they went too far. They said, neural net, that's kind of like a brain, and a Turing machine is what became a digital computer, so computers can be made into brains. Wrong. Not wrong in principle, but wrong in the way that is now proposed. So I would say that the idea that we're well on our way to use existing neural nets to become brains, that's fantasy. There is no proof of that. There's hype of that, but there is no proof of that. Now I've gone down this rabbit hole a little bit. Now I have to pull myself out. What is the alternative? The alternative to embracing that sequence is to go back to the principles of cybernetics and to engage as many people in the environment in the world as possible. Why not teach it to first graders? Sounds like a crazy idea. Well, you can teach systems to first graders. I was just in the country a few days, as some of you know. And the systems world of a forest is extraordinary. I think you can teach that to a first grader. But then you're into the idea of information and purpose and goal and so on. And I think there's a pathway toward teaching it. So what I would do differently, that was your question, I haven't lost it entirely, is I would go back to the ideas of cybernetics and I would first say, hey, why didn't we teach it from then? I wasn't around in the 40s and 50s, but their goal was not to teach it to children. Their goal was not to bring it to the world. Their goal was just to figure it out at their level in that time. But today, all these years later, is it still valuable? I think so. Some people think so. The world is not succeeding with just science or just governance or just whatever is going on now, right? We have all of these wicked challenges, these pandemics. They're building, right? And they're becoming more and more entangled. It's getting worse. It's not getting better. So my question is, can we embrace the power that those of us who feel is there behind cybernetics and spread it? And not as in the sense of, saying, I have the secret, here I'm going to give it to you, but rather, what do you need? What is the problem that you have? How do you look at the world? Well, here's an alternative. What do you think? So not to evangelize cybernetics, but to offer it. So one way of offering it, and we've started to experiment with this in 1-800, in the new Macy, is in America, we have a free calling number. I don't know whether you have it in your country. It's 1-800. So if you see 1-800, it's a free call. This comes from the day when a long distance call cost money. So 1-800, is a kind of helpline. So 1-800-CYBERNET. So you call 1-800-CYBERNET and that person answers. Let me play that role. Hello, this is 1-800-CYBERNET. Thank you for calling. Ask one question, get 3 answers in return. This call may be monitored for quality assurance. Please listen carefully because the options have changed. So it's a little bit funny, but it's also, we want to embrace others. We want others to come and feel comfortable. Another way of saying it is, you've heard of software as a service. There's even artificial intelligence as a service, right? If I want to run an AI machine, I don't have to buy the machine. I don't have to know anything about installing software. I can rent it through the cloud. Well, maybe you could get access to Numacy through the cloud. Numacy is a service, 1-800-CYBERNET. So I'm throwing out a couple of different ideas for what I would like to focus on in the future. And we have this modest movement going of people interested in particular ideas. We develop some themes, we will be developing others. And the idea of how to bring these ideas, which were not brought to the people or the children or the generations in the 1940s and 50s. But we have the internet now. We know a lot more about one-to-one teaching, right? We can let people explore on their own. Maybe I can stick in one of my interfaces where they're having a conversation with the content. That's the way I talk about it. And I built many prototypes of that kind, and I'm able to resuscitate them slightly. So can we come to bring the humanity out in cybernetics versus AI, and not to oppose AI, but to have both the power of the digital and the humanness of the analog, as I like to call it. So we need to harness the digital and not reject it. We're not Luddites. And we need to embrace, we are analog, biological, organic creatures. How do we do that? How do we keep the digital and the analog? Well, cybernetics is a kind of bilingual sensibility, which can bring the two together. So it could be a language for comprehensively embracing this technology thing, which we've put everywhere in the world. Everyone, not everyone in the world, but many people have technology in their pockets. 2 billion are on the internet every day. I read once. 4 billion are on the internet in the course of a week or a month or whatever. Active users. That's a lot of people. But what are we doing with them? What's going on? What are we doing? Who am I to say we? What is the society doing with all of those people? Who is the society that is making those machines do what it's doing? These are the questions I want to ask. And it may seem audacious, but we're not doing very well. And if we don't have audacity, what will happen next? I don't want to think about that too much. I don't have children, but those who have children are afraid. The children themselves are afraid. If you ask teenagers what's going on, they're not in good shape mentally, emotionally, because they see that's what's ahead of them. It's not this. So in these small ways, I'm trying literally every day and with great joy and in a way of wanting to give back to find ways of using cybernetics. The gifts I've been given by the people I mentioned, literally face to face, or that I've studied or that I've worked with since, that also have this in common. So I see a path. I see the path that started more clearly now than when I was that undergrad, when I thought, wow, this cybernetics thing, I want that. I don't care about this AI thing. I want to go. So we'll see how that will help. If at all, I don't want to be immodest, but I do want to be audacious for the wicked challenges.
Want more? Check out the snack pack in the video description for bonus content and resources.